First time in an airplane. It was on my honeymoon with Nick. We're going to New York. Short flight, no problem, right? Well, suddenly the plane hits turbulence, right? Me and Nick were thrown all around that bathroom.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And today we have a high-flying lineup of shows. What are we talking about today, Amy?
Today, we are talking about a fear of flying. All of our episodes, someone in the cast is afraid to fly and hilarity ensues. So we're going to be watching Sanford and Son, Season 3, Episode 8, Super Flyer, Three's Company, Season 6, Episode 25, Up in the Air, Cheers, also Season 6, Episode 19, Airport 5, and finally, Blackish, Season 2, Episode 7, Charlie in Church.
So looking over the options for the fear of flying, it's interesting that this is one that there's a lot of them sort of from the old days.
Right.
And then as time goes on, it still pops up, but it becomes less of a thing.
Right. It becomes more of like the subplot or the C plot. It's like, not really central to the main story. It's sort of like an extra thing that they throw in there. And I think that's kind of because there's not really that much to do with it, which is what we saw in these episodes.
Well, and also just because as time goes on in the real world, we're getting used to flying. The first show that we're talking about is from 1972, I think.
Right.
So in the 50 years that have gone by, I think you still have people freaked out about flying. But yeah, it's just less of a thing.
You're saying that there's fewer people that have not had an opportunity to fly. So that
it's more of a common thing in life. One of the big ones we're not talking about is The Simpsons, the one where Marge has a fear of flying. Because we just talked about The Simpsons. But that's one where it's all about, like, it sort of goes into her past where she's a little girl and gives you some fun sort of flashbacks and stuff. So just sort of throwing it out there as we get into the different ways that the fear of flying is sort of, tapped into in these different episodes. That's another one that's sort of like we can use that to talk about, childhood trauma.
Yeah, the backstories. Another one that we're not touching on this episode is the pilot episode of the Bob Newhart show. Sees his wife Susanna Plachette being scared to fly, and that one sort of had a similar pathway because Bob Newhart in the Bob Newhart show is a psychologist, and he's a therapist, and also in Cheers, Frasier Crane is a therapist. So we saw sort of a similar plot line there, where the person who's scared about flying, and then the person who is the therapist, and they solve the problems in various and sundry ways.
Yeah. So Amy, are you afraid of flying, or do you know anyone who is?
I am not afraid of flying, and I've watched my mom get more and more nervous as she's gotten older. So I remember flying with her when we were younger, and she would always, sort of like lean her head back and breathe during takeoff and landing. But it wasn't like what we see in these episodes where people are hilariously freaking out and wearing all sorts of trinkets. We have 2 different episodes where people reveal that they have all of these religious
iconography
trinkets to keep them safe. But yeah, it was never anything, over the top like that. And then as time has gone on, she's just gotten more and more nervous about it, and more vocal about how she is nervous about it, how she doesn't really like to fly.
Now, is it because...
And she will if she has to.
Is it because, like, she sort of finds it unpleasant, or is it because, like, I think I might die? I think the plane might crash.
She had a scary experience one time where the plane dropped, 10,000 feet, and 2 seconds or
so
whatever.
she had the same experience as Anthony Anderson's character, basically, that we're going to get to
in Blackish.
Blackish.
So he had a previous scary experience, and that was why he was afraid to fly. Which I think, to your point, is a more modern reason that people are a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to fly either. I don't like it for various reasons, more having to do with the airport experience.
And the fact that you have really long legs.
Yeah, I find it uncomfortable, but I am, I think, like most people in the modern world, just sort of comforted by the statistics and just the sort of basic knowledge that we have. But my grandma was very much in the boat with Sanford, where she was like, you're crazy. Like flying, getting into a giant metal thing that's going to go up thousands of feet in the air is dumb. You're stupid if you do that.
Don't do that. That's scary.
So yeah, I sort of recalled her, attitude about it when we were watching these. But let's get into it. Let's get into Sanford and Son.
So Sanford and Son, the plot of this show is that the main character, Red Fox, Fred Sanford, he has an uncle that he doesn't even remember who has died and lived in St. Louis, and he's inherited $1,500 from him. So the stipulation is he has to go to St. Louis to claim the $1,500 and also do the funeral arrangements. So he and his son Lamont they go to the airport with all of Fred's protestations.
Yeah. So Sanford and Son, I've never watched this. So
even like in reruns and stuff back in the day?
I knew of it, and it's a fun dynamic. And, there's just something so straightforward about, like, maybe there were other supporting characters in the show in other episodes, but we don't get any of that here. We get these two guys. One's the straight man, one's the funny guy. One's young, one's old, one's easygoing, one's cranky. It's just like this very simple sort of Smothers Brothers, like just classic comedy, dynamic. And yet, right from the start, it's just like this guy has a funny personality. We're going to build the scenes around that. And his little turns when he's saying, I've never heard of him, he's suspicious of the lawyer that's come to tell him about the will. And then he switches into this faux sadness. He's like a little puppy dog. He's so sad about the uncle or whatever. And it's really funny. He's really good.
Yeah, no, he's very funny. I think another one of his like characteristics sort of throughout the series, Fred Sanford, that is the lack of trust in the authorities, where his son is a little bit more like, come on, Pop, like, it's fine. Like, you can talk to this guy, when he assumes that the attorney is a Fed or a cop or something else when he shows up, and like you said, keeps giving him fake stories until he finds out he's getting the money. And then and starts fake crying, the alligator tears, my favorite uncle, and whatever. So there's a running joke throughout this episode where he keeps asking for Jackie, the flight attendant, Jackie. And this is back still, many of these episodes are back in the day where the term stewardess was still in fashion.
And they're talking about that because it was part of the advertising campaign.
Right.
It would be like, I'm Jackie, come ride me in the sky or something
ride
weird.
With me. It's a TWA. Okay. So it was apparently a TWA advertisement at that time. And so it was, hi, I'm Jackie, fly me to St. Louis. That was like the TWA.
That's creepy as hell. Fly me to St. Louis? That's weird.
So that's why he keeps looking for Jackie. And then they have a very questionable joke at the end where all of the flight attendants that have come through have been, attractive women. And then on the flight back, he asks the first flight attendant that stops by, like, hey, are you Jackie? Where's Jackie? This is, the third or fourth time we get this joke. And she goes, oh, do you want to see Jackie? Okay. And she goes and gets her. And they have this woman who has no makeup on and has a very dour face, gives him a very sort of stern look. And then he's like,
yeah, and she's ugly. That's the joke. They put out a casting notice. We need an ugly lady to be in our sitcom so we can end the entire episode episode
on this
joke about how ugly she is.
How ugly she is.
But let's back up. The premise of the episode is, they have to fly across the country to deal with the affairs of their uncle that they never knew. And yeah, you really get that sense of like, this is what a situation comedy was meant to be. We got this
situation. Bring in the comedy.
Yeah,
Red Fox is that. Like, he's hilarious.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
He can make a meal out of the sentence, and I. Like, he's so funny.
Yeah, you really feel the connection to theater. Like, you really feel the relationship they have with the live audience and how this is just one step removed from something that would be just a live performance.
Right, absolutely. There's several times where characters have whole movements that are going on, like the blocking continues without any dialogue because the audience is laughing so hard, and it's silliness. So what are the things that I wanted to get your thoughts on for each episode, but we can start with this one, the amazing plane sets that we get in each episode, which is very little like any plane I've ever been on.
Before we're on the plane, I wanted to note, we happened to, for our own reasons, watch a Family Ties episode that took place in an airport the other day.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I don't know what it is. In the 80s, airports in TV sitcoms looked like doctor's offices.
Well, it's that small regional airport look, right? Where
they have these partitions and stuff.
And you walk up directly to a counter and it was all very much like, not a lot of security. Although this episode, the Sanford and Son episode we watched had a very funny looking metal detector it looked like two cardboard tubes that they painted silver with light up little balls on top. I thought that was funny.
Yeah. So the airport, it has this smallness to it that it looks like you're going to the dentist office or something. And of course, because Sanford's main take on flying, he's scared of it, but he's also just grumpy in general. So they're going to use every step of the process of flying to, have fun with how he would react to these different situations, having to be frisked in security and all that. But to your question about the airport set, I don't know. I mean, you know what to expect from a show like this. So it was as lifelike as I would hope for. And you have the weird 70s styles, right?
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting because they had, so this is 2 out of the 4 episodes that we watched. The people were flying first class. So we got to see first class.
And this is when they called it second class.
First class. And that's right. Second class was behind the curtain.
They hadn't come up with any euphemisms yet.
It wasn't coach. So Fred and his son were flying first class, and they had these really sort of nice, covered in almost a very like 1970s tweed jacket sort of fabric. And then in front of them, they were sitting in the front row, but in front of them, there were smaller red leather seats that didn't look anything like the seats they were sitting in.
Like the jump seats that the flight attendants are supposed to sit in, maybe?
Oh, maybe. Because they, no one ever sat in them because it was in front of the action. So they were empty. And so I was like, well, if they're in first class, what are those seats that are in front of them?
But yeah, of course, you only get, a dozen or so seats. Right. It's a little chunk of a thing. But yeah, love all of the, what happens when you're on a flight? Well, you have to listen to their little spiel about what to do if, an emergency happens. We get fun humor with that. We get the guy, the problem that we deal with all the time, smoking on the airplane, right? Remember those times? And so,
back in the day when they were smoking on airplanes. Yes, there's a funny comedy moment where this guy lights up a cigarette next to Red Fox, and he's like, "Are you serious? Are you really going to do that here?" And then the guy unbuckles his seatbelt and stands up, and he's 7 feet tall. He's enormous, and so then Red starts talking to the guy behind him, being like, "You got to put that cigarette out."
Yeah. Which I thought Sanford could take him. I mean, just because the guy's
doing
tall.
Okay, Moose. You're doing all right. He called him Moose.
The guy's tall, but he's a schlubby, dorky looking guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was tall and he was broad too. And look at the way Red walks in this in the show. Like, Sanford is not a young
he's
man.
rickety for sure.
He's not a young man. He walks like he needs a knee or a hip replacement a little bit. And I don't know if in his life, if that was a character choice, or at that point, maybe he was old enough that he was actually walking that way.
Yeah, you get lots of good stuff with them on the plane. Like I said, just reacting to the different, aspects of it. And then eventually they reach their destination and find out, like, you don't get to keep any of this money.
Right.
Your uncle that you've been pretending to be mourning, he just basically chose you to handle the logistics of his funeral.
To handle the funeral arrangements, which by the time they got there, the attorney had already handled, and then just needed him to sign that check over to him for the funeral arrangements. So it turned out to kind of be a scam anyway.
Yeah. But it got him on a plane, and, there's some, the lawyer says something about, like, we will have him interred. And Sanford's like, well, I hope you bury him too. Some of that sort of classic lowbrow, highbrow kind of stuff. But yeah, this reminded me of the Laverne and Shirley pilot, in the sense that you go back to these old ones and you just get that pure sitcom stuff.
Yes.
You just get that, hey, what if a couple of crazy girls were invited to a fancy party? What if this crotchety old dude had to get on an airplane for the first time? And there's a simplicity to it that's really fun.
Yeah. There a couple of goofs in the episode that made me laugh when he pulls out the trinkets, all of his religious trinkets, and he's got a crucifix and a Star of David and a this and a Buddha, and then it's like a charm necklace that he pulls out of his pocket. That's what set the metal detector off. And the Buddha comes off and like bounces away, and Red Fox is right on it. He like bends down, picks it up. Well, he doesn't look anywhere near as rickety as he had when he was walking a second ago, because he grabs it really quick so it doesn't bounce off the set, and then continues on with the scene. Always love a good like accidental, happening where they stay in character and keep it rolling.
Definitely. He even had a few little verbal things where I could tell he just sort of like said something a little differently than how it was in the script, or said something twice. And yeah, they just have a spontaneity where it's like, sure, we'll stop if you really mess up, but otherwise, like, we're going to keep it going,
And his son, Lamont, right? His whole thing is staring awkwardly, or just sort of like giving his dad withering looks. Like that's his, like so much of his character is just this, exasperated silence looking at his dad.
And just setting him up, just feeding him setups, just going like, oh, Dad, they say that the most dangerous aspect of going to the plane is ... just whatever they need to give him for him to then have his funny rejoinder.
So this is also two of the episodes that we have in this lineup are named after movies. So this is a play on the blaxploitation film Superfly, because this is named Superflyer. And then the Cheers episode is Airport 5, which there had been 4 there had been 4 airplane movies or whatever.
So Airport is the serious movie that Airplane is a spoof of.
Is a spoof of. Right. So there had been 4 airport movies then, and this was Airport 5.
So shall we move on to Three's Company?
Three's Company. This is season 6, episode 25. We're already past where we had, Suzanne Summers?
Yeah.
So we're already past the time when she is on the show. She's left, and we have Terry, who doesn't play a big role in this episode. This is mostly Janet and Jack, and they are going to a fancy party on an island that's hosted by none other than Greg Brady.
Yeah.
Special guest star Barry Williams. And Janet has a crush on this guy. He's very wealthy. This is his beach house or his country home or whatever. And they're gonna have this, he's giving this party, and he asks her to bring a date. And she's very upset because they had a date So she asked Jack to pretend to be somebody fancy and go with her. Jack, we then find out, is afraid to fly. So he talks to their other neighbor or his friend or whatever and his friend's like, oh, I'll just get you tranquilizers. You'll be able to fly and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So he does, and they go to the party, and then funny things happen.
So Three's Company, I don't know. What's your relationship with Three's Company?
Three's Company is another one like Sanford and Son for me that it was on reruns, and I would watch it sort of intermittently, right? Like the stuff that was on in the afternoon and reruns, Saved by the Bell was always on, and so I would always try to catch that, but they usually would play like 3 episodes in a row, and I would watch one, and then I would change the channel and watch other things. And the other things that were on at that time were these kinds of shows. So I liked to watch Three's Company and I liked a little bit of Sanford and Son as well, but they were never the main, like they weren't the reason that I turned the TV on in the afternoon when I got home from school. But yeah, and there were a lot of jokes I remember from Three's Company that were over my head.
Yes. I would say the whole premise of the show was over my head when I was a kid. The idea that it's a guy pretending to be gay.
Yeah, but that really only lasts that first season.
Yeah, I guess the whole thing was just not something I would have been into at that time, because not only are there no kids or young people on the show, the whole premise of it is grown up, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, see, and I only know that as like a storyline from that pilot, from that like a first episode, because after that, it just becomes some other little funny physical comedy that John Ritter is doing when the landlord comes around.
Yeah.
And that's what made me laugh at this show, is just the physicality and John Ritter's silly faces and all of that.
Yeah. So let's talk about John Ritter for a minute, because I feel like obviously if you're looking back on Three's Company, that's the heart of it, right? That's why everyone would love it, because John Ritter was this beloved figure. And definitely, he's another one of these guys, just like when we started watching Night Court and I saw how Harry Anderson is, he's one of those 80s sort of mild-mannered, nice guy leading men, in the style of an Alan Alda or something that, we're past the tough guy John Wayne types. Now we can have these guys that are a little, maybe some of them are going to be nerdy like Woody Allen, maybe some of them are going to be more, mellow like Albert Brooks, whoever. And he's another one of those guys, another one of those kind of, you understand why the premise of the show was him posing as a gay man, even if maybe those stereotypes don't totally hold up anymore. You get that he's not a tough guy.
Yeah.
I was surprised at the extent to which I found him a little annoying. And he was a little more manic and a little more sort of turned up than I would have thought.
Well, and I don't remember, I haven't watched I've watched the show in so long, so I don't really remember if this is more than normal. I mean, obviously the dance sequence is
even
way
before that,
more than normal. But yeah, I feel like the way he, his faces and his sort of weirdness and the way he kind of pratfalls and is like jumpy about things, I feel like that's pretty much who he is. Like that's kind of like the character in the show.
And he's also a little more like his first big joke of the episode is Terry is telling him about a book or a movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives her this big, sarcastic, sort of like piss off kind of line and storms off. And it was just, I don't remember the joke exactly.
Yeah.
But I just kind of remember going like, oh, okay. It's not like I hate him or anything, but like, oh, this is a little bit more aggressive and just a little bit different than the sort of image I had in my mind.
Well, I mean, she was describing the plot of this book and it was dumb.
Yeah.
It was. Didn't you say something like, I can't wait to see the movie or whatever? Like,
yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, he's a little mean. And again, I'm not saying it was horrible or anything, but it just, from that point on, I just noticed him being just a little harder to take than I expected.
Than you expected. Well, so when I was looking him up and thinking, how did he come to, like, where did he come from? You know, like, what did he act in before he got this show? This was a major, you know, starring role or whatever. Apparently, he beat out 50 people to star in this show, because the show is based off, it's a British import, so it's based off of a British show called Man About the House. Same sort of, I think, just like in The Office, the first season or the first few seasons of Man About the House and Three's Company, plot same scripts, like they just retooled them for American audiences, and then that's what they did. But Billy Crystal was one of the guys who was up for this role. Could you imagine Billy Crystal in a role like that?
Yes, just because I don't know if I mentioned his name or not, but when I think of those 80s nice guy, sort of mild-mannered, nebbishy leading men, absolutely. Absolutely. And knowing that this goes back as early as it did, that it actually starts in the 70s, where Billy Crystal is quite a ways away from his movie career and all that, I absolutely could see that. It would be different because I was noting how there's frankly a little bit of an ethnic divide in these 80s nebbishy guys, and the Jewish ones like Woody Allen and Billy Crystal have their own sort of thing going on. They feel a little more urban. They just have a different flavor, whereas John Ritter and Harry Anderson, they're just a little bit more of the waspy, nebbishy guy.
Right.
So it would be a little different, but yeah, I could totally see that.
See how that would go down. Well, the one that I sort of compare him to is that he reminds me of young Tom Hanks. In like Bosom Buddies, sort of, because again, that wasn't one I watched a lot of, but just again, you know, we were just watching Family Ties, and there's Family Ties 2-episode arc where Tom Hanks is guest starring, and he's got, you know, that sort of similar energetic, physical comedy, quick one-liners,
super likable
kind of energy, and that I see those guys as kind of contemporaries in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would just say Hanks is even better, and not to be mean to John Ritter's Ghost, but yeah, I think the fact that they were both super successful, but Tom Hanks was Tom Hanks and John Ritter was John Ritter, like I think that all kind of lines up.
Yeah, that totally. There's a moment in that episode of Family Ties where Tom Hanks has a sort of a mini monologue, and like his acting chops, you're just like, oh, that's why he wins Oscars.
Yeah,
like,
you'll go with him anywhere.
Yeah.
And John Ritter's also really good. And so interestingly, we don't get any actual airplane stuff in this episode. The airplane is not pictured.
Not at all. We have just the fear of flying established. The friend, I think it's Larry is his friend's name, is like, oh, I have tranquilizers. I'll bring him over. Don't worry. He comes back. Terry warns him, this is the last we see of her in the episode, hey, don't take those. That's not a good idea. You don't know how you're going to react. And he's like, I won't take one. And then she leaves, and he's like, I'll take two.
Yeah.
So then they get to the party.
Yeah. So we get, even though we don't get the airplane, we get all of his reaction to the anxiety of going on the plane, which is a great sort of vehicle for all his weird manic energy. We get this fun sort of practice thing with the friend, you know, sort of training him or helping him, you know, sit in this chair and pretend that you're in the airplane and all that.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. Yes.
And then we get what is going to recur in another one of these shows. The fear of flying is a good way to get a straight-laced character on drugs, right?
Yes.
It's a good way to get a sort of nervous person who wouldn't necessarily be a drug guy all hopped up and acting weird.
So he takes the tranquilizers. Then we see Jack and Janet at the party, and she's like, wow, you're so relaxed on the flight. I'm so surprised. I thought you said you were scared. And he's like, oh yeah. And then he starts to sort of like slump down the stairs, and he's like, sure, I took some tranquilizers. And she was like, oh my goodness. And then they offer him champagne, and she's like, no. And then he's like, why not? You can't drink on that. That's really dangerous. You have to be careful. So of course now we're setting something up for later on. He is doing a horrible job. trying to fit into this party even before he has anything to drink, just on the tranquilizers.
Yeah.
He keeps making up jobs.
My note on this was he's like the Joker in The Dark Knight. He has a different origin story for everybody he talks to. He's just this like agent of chaos that's going around. He tells one lady he's a congressman. He tells another lady he's a doctor or whatever.
Right. And it's all because Janet has said, please don't tell anyone you're a chef, because this is back before chefs had prestige, because it was before Food Network television.
You know what you can tell them you are, though? A priest. No negative connotations with that.
A Jesuit priest. She was not happy with him with that either. She gave him one, and she gave him an elbow. And then so she goes out to the balcony with Barry Williams, with Greg Brady, and we get sort of that sitcom thing where everyone's giving the least amount of information. So it's very clear that Greg Brady is hitting on her and like wants to spend time with her, but he also has just introduced them to this woman, Nancy, who was on his arm. So it would seem that she is his date to this. And he asked Janet to bring a date. Right. So why wouldn't one assume? And then it comes out throughout the episode, not even in this second conversation that they have, but that's his sister.
Yeah.
So then we go back inside, and Nancy's trying to put the moves on Jack a little bit. And, you know, some guy comes over, or she walks away, and some guy comes over and has a drink called the Rocket that'll wake you up if you're feeling down. And he's like, no, I can't, because I can't have anything to drink. You know, I'm a brain surgeon. I have surgery tomorrow.
Right.
And so I got to keep my hands steady. And the guy's like, no alcohol in it. It's just a pep you up drink.
Yeah, it doesn't take much convincing. And so he does have this drink. And you pointed out to me afterwards that the version of this episode that we saw on Paramount Plus is
edited down.
Truncated. Yeah. And so he does a truly virtuosic, slapstick, choreographed thing.
Yes.
Where he starts kind of slumping and flopping around because now he's combined his tranquilizers with whatever is in this red rocket thing. And so the version we initially watched on Paramount Plus is, it's a bunch of crazy slapstick stuff. You watch him get more and more crazy, and he's flopping around and he's doing a dance and
right. He starts to flop around. Janet sees him acting weirder than he's been. Okay. So the very beginning of this is he takes a sip of the drink and he kind of puts his head down and comes up with this face that I hope you use as the image of this show, as like the thumbnail, because it is hilarious. He comes up with this face where he looks like a rabid raccoon, and that's the beginning of the rocket kicking in. So he starts moving and grooving and doing a little bit of dancing that's kind of like weirdly inappropriate humpy dancing, and Janet sees him and pulls him out onto the balcony, is like, what's going on? And he's like moving and grooving his way out to there, and then he starts dancing with her, and he grabs this older woman who's with, talking to someone behind them, and he's dancing with both of them, and then he spins Janet off camera, and he's like, come on, baby, groove with me, and takes the older lady, and they hop back inside, and he's dancing with her, and then spins her around, and she grabs a guy's toupee off his head, and then falls onto the couch, and then he's doing all sorts of silly stuff. He goes over to the bar and is dancing over there, gets up on a table and is like, they have fake tap dancing sounds, jumps down off of that, swings a lady over his leg, slides backwards on an ottoman, and then sees a lamp and decides he's going to dance with the lamp and gives the lamp a kiss, and it cuts to Barry Williams and Janet out on the balcony having another conversation where we finally find out that Nancy's the sister. So full disclosure, the reason I wanted to include this episode and the reason I went looking for a trope in this episode was because I saw this full dance number on TikTok and laughed so hard. So I said to Jay, I'm like, wait, it doesn't end with the lamp. there's this whole next part of that scene where he gets up on the actual bar and dances with a plant, falls off, and then comes up with a plant on his head. So wherever you're watching this, if you don't get the extended cut version where you get to see him coming up from behind the bar with the plant on his head, highly recommend. It's great.
Yeah, look it up on YouTube because it does change. It changes the comedy of it because the version we saw, there's, just all of the things that you described. There's plenty of excess and craziness and slapstick hijinks. So you absolutely get that he's gone over the top and there are all these funny little beats. But when you see the whole thing play out, it's the comedy of it's gone so far beyond and it becomes fully choreographed like you're watching a full-blown old Hollywood musical where he's dancing down the stairs and using all it's arranged in a way that it becomes surreal. And so it just goes to another level.
Yeah,
and
it really is great. And then the whole show kind of closes out where, Jack then is embarrassed. He's sitting on the couch. He's all sweaty. Nancy, the sister, comes over and is like giving him, a wet cloth for his head or something. And then he finds out she's the sister. And then there's, all of the people that he's lied to about his origin story. It comes back to bite him because turns out she's a home ec teacher and she feels like all these people are just fakers. And he's like, that's so funny. I'm a chef. And then everyone's like, oh, congressman, are you going to, and oh, don't you have surgery tomorrow? And so then she's like, ew, get away from me. You're as bad as the rest of them.
Yeah. I just want to say about this one again, with all that slapstick stuff, that buzz of the live audience, you just really feel it. And you see how as we move through these shows and we end up with a single camera one where it feels like you're watching a movie, that is something that is lost over time. And you can hear the individual audience members when he does this certain wild thing and you just hear somebody scream, in surprise at the thing he does.
Yeah.
However much John Ritter's, vibe didn't totally work for me in the dialogue scenes towards the beginning, he's amazing in all of this.
He brought it all
stuff
back at the end. It's really, really so much fun to watch. He's just having a good time. And I mean, we are later on in the series. I think, what did this run for, like 8 seasons or 9 seasons or something? So we're definitely later on in the series where he knows who he is. He knows who his character is. And so he's just having a good time and doing something fun, getting to do something a little bit different.
Yeah. And so just to sort of track the fear of flying stuff, you had Red Fox. You have it being such a great vehicle for his grumpiness. And now you see how you plug in that same fear of flying to a different kind of character. You get all that great, sort of nervousness in the first half. And then that gets you to the drug use. And then that gets you to all this crazy shenanigans, that pay out in the second half.
Right. Like in my addled brain, I'm this most uninhibited version of my silly self, which totally tracks with the Jack Tripper character. So, okay, then now what will it look like when we see Carla, who has she also has sort of a grumpy kind of persona in Cheers. Like, that's gonna, where are we gonna go with that? Is it gonna be more like Red Fox and the grumpiness, or is it gonna be like Jack Tripper being all silly?
Exactly. Not to mention it's also a decade and a half or so later in aviation.
From Sanford. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's 73, and then the Cheers one is 80s. Like 80. Yeah, it's 88. Okay, yeah.
So let's get into Cheers. Season 6, episode 19.
There it is.
Airport 5.
Airport 5, season 6, episode 19. That's right. So plot of this show is that Carla has a new husband, Eddie. Former hockey player is now has gotten a job in like an Ice Capades kind of show where he is a penguin, and he is going on tour, and the first stop is in Seattle. So he wants her to come out to Seattle for, to visit him after he's been out there for a little while to see the show. And at first she's kind of like not happy that he's not a hockey player anymore, that he's doing this like silly costumey kind of thing. But then she comes around, but we find out that she doesn't want to go out there because she's afraid to fly.
She's afraid to fly. Now, this is in the 80s now, and Carla is in her 40s probably. So it's a little, this isn't the same as like 60 or 70-year-old Red Fox, in the 70s being afraid of flying. It's a little more unusual. It's a little more of like her sort of quirk, I would say.
Right. And she's so tough. Yeah. Right. Carla's never afraid of anything or anyone. She's super, she's scrappy. Like if anybody could be called scrappy, it's Carla. Yeah. And so at first her husband, Eddie, doesn't believe her, because she doesn't say she's afraid to fly. Yeah. She just keeps kind of changing the subject and saying, yeah, I'll see you out there or whatever. And then he talks to Sam and is like, will you talk to her and find out what's going on? I think she's ashamed, or I think she's embarrassed about my job. And that's what makes her come around and finally say she's scared to fly. And he's like, no way. There's no way. Carla's not afraid of anything. And so then she has to get on the phone and say, no, yeah, I actually am. And then Frasier walks into the bar and Sam's like, hey, I got something for you. Will you help Carla? And he's like, oh, sure, I'll start a class. And in 1 week, you'll be cured, because, we'll slowly introduce you to the things that get you comfortable with your fear and all the things that scare you. And then by the end of the week, you'll be good to go, and you can go and see Eddie's skating show.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You've got one character who's ironically afraid of flying. You have one character who's a psychiatrist. Put them together, you got yourself a story.
Gives an opportunity for Frasier to have his little weird sort of nervous energy that he has when he, in every situation. But now we get to see him outside of the bar.
Sure, we get to see him do his thing. But yeah, let's back up for a second. Let's just talk about Cheers. What's your feelings on Cheers?
I love Cheers. I remember Woody thinking he was so funny. Cheers was one of these shows that my parents watched. It was that, before there was like must-see TV on Thursday nights. It was Thursday nights on NBC, and we watched it.
Yeah. We weren't a huge Cheers household, but my dad famously looked like Frasier. For me, it was another case of like, there are no kids on this show. I don't know what a bar is, like this is a grown-up show about grown-up issues. So in its original run, I wasn't that into it. What I will say, watching it now, it's so good. You're right. Like just the ensemble is amazing. And it is just, it's so funny how Woody Harrelson is the one who, out of all these people, really turned into like one of the most amazing and interesting and super impressive actor. Yeah. And yeah, you wouldn't have necessarily foretold that seeing him here, but
no, but he's good. He's really like, everybody has their lane. Everybody has their thing that they're doing. And it, just like all of these James Burrows shows, it just clicks, right? Yeah. Like it's there's no waiting around. Everything is just kind of flying. There's always a joke. There's always a little, whatever.
Nor does it feel cluttered. You don't feel like they're battling for screen time or for importance. And what I noticed was they talk about like when Greg Daniels was developing The Office, how they wanted to make sure that all those people filling out the background were interesting actors and comedians and improvisers, even though when they first started the show, they didn't necessarily have ideas or characters for all of them. But they knew that in this kind of show, you're going to always have people in the background. You're going to always be looking at people doing things while the main characters are doing whatever they're doing. And I really thought of that watching this one, where every shot, whatever it is that's going on in the foreground, there's stuff, you're looking at people all over the place. Some of them are characters we know, some of them are just background artists, miming dialogue, whatever, but you're always looking at people, and it subconsciously has an effect. It changes the experience of watching it than if you're just watching some living room set, and then you combine that with the aesthetics of the show, that in the 80s, you had so many like beige living rooms, like my beloved Charles in Charge, as much as I love it, it's just a beige living room,
Well, mauve. There was a lot of mauve in that
Yeah,
living room.
Facts of Life, Different Strokes, so many of these bland living room sets. This place is this beautiful wood and exposed brick, and it's
And
shot.
brass. There was
Yes.
have you seen that before? This is it's an actual bar, right? Like established in the 1880s. But this bar, I'd completely forgotten this, has the wood part of the really like deep, rich mahogany.
Yeah.
And then it has going around it a brass bar. Like
it's classy as hell.
Why is there a brass bar around the counter part of a bar?
I don't know the function it serves. I just feel like between the wood and the brick, and then just the feeling, like I said, of having all the hubbub of the people all around in the background of the shots, it just looks beautiful and has this warmth to it that it just like every second of it, just on like a visual level, feels like miles above your typical 80s sitcom.
Yeah, and then just visually. So we get Carla, and then we have the B plot, right? Which is Kirstie Alley's character, Rebecca. She's heard that there is a restaurant or a bar critic that's going to be coming around. Yes. The last time Cheers was reviewed by this guy, it was not a good review. And Sam Malone in February 1988 calls him a hater.
Yeah. Ted Danson invented the term hater, maybe?
Did he? So I tried to look it up. And of course, everything is talking about Play Is Gonna Play, which is a song from the late 90s.
It's hard to say. He's obviously not the first person to say the word hater, but when he casually threw out, "Oh, that guy's a hater," it did seem like he had traveled back in time.
Yes. Both Jay and I just stopped and sort of looked at each other, and we were like, is that hater's origin story?
Yeah.
So we get this great moment where the critic comes into the bar, and Kirstie Alley does a gymnastic vault over the bar in this long skirt.
Rebecca, her character.
Rebecca, yes. It's not actually, it's a stunt double, which you can tell. But it was very surprising in that moment to see she's wearing this long purple, very 1980s long skirt with boots outfit, and she one hand vaults over the bar and the skirt is like flowing out. I mean, it was really a sight to be seen. And so later on in the episode, we get spoilers. Carla actually does conquer her fear of flying and go to see her her husband in Seattle. But one of the times when he's on the phone with her, there's a fight that has broken out, like hockey players do, but it's among all the Ice Capades characters. And there's a woman who has brown hair and looks an awful lot like Kirstie Alley, who is dressed in a princess outfit and starts throwing elbows and jumping into this hockey fight, and is the only woman in this scene. And I was like, I wonder if that's the woman who did the vault over the bar earlier in the episode.
You've got the mystery critic plot, but yeah, it's kind of unrelated from the main story. I did note, talking about the sort of squirrely, nebbishy 80s leading men, Ted Danson is a throwback. Now we're back in the more tough guy, sort of broad-chested classical hunk, I think, with Ted Danson.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider Ted Danson's character a tough guy, but he definitely is. He's like he's matinee idol, right? He's a former athlete. He's very handsome. His hair was like oddly lit. In this show, or in this episode, it was like when he would bend down, it would almost look like it was auburn, like he had some like red coloring in it, and then when he would lean back, it would look more brown. So it was interesting. I wasn't quite sure if we're far enough into this series where he's already dyeing his hair. And also, this episode was directed by Norm.
Yeah.
Because James Burrows had pneumonia. So Frasier says, "Yeah, I'm going to help you, Carla." Mm-hmm. And then we get another airplane set.
Yes. Now, this is where I really feel the sort of limitations of that 22-minute sitcom format because they show up at the airplane set. It's an improvement on the Red Fox one. It's more modern, but they've enlisted this whole group therapy thing, right? They've recruited a half a dozen other patients, and Frasier has given this whole seminar or study or whatever it is, showing them, helping them overcome their fear of flying. And this is the culmination in a however many session long, course that they've all done.
Right. And he sold it earlier in the episode that it was going to be a week.
Yeah.
So this is at the end of like 5 days or 6 days or something.
And we didn't get to see any of this.
No.
We went from him saying this is what is going to happen in the bar to here we are in the plane. What a fun week that was.
So I kept getting confused as to whether or not this was a simulation, right? Because they had flight attendants and everybody was buckling in and they were saying, "Oh, sir, you have to take your seat. We're about to take off." And all of that was happening. But then I was confused because I was like, well, all of these other patients aren't going to be flying to Seattle with Carla. So it seems as though and I guess plane tickets were cheap enough that they had like a practice flight as part of this session. That's not how I took it.
That's funny. I didn't think about the fact that none of the other patients would have a reason to go where she was going.
Right.
I just thought it was like, yeah, I'm going to get a bunch of people who are deathly afraid of flying, and it's going to end with us all taking a flight. I don't know if maybe one of the conditions for the study was like, you also need to have business in Cleveland or wherever
I was going to say this wasn't Seattle. This wasn't the flight to Seattle. This was a different flight.
Though?
Because later on in the episode, when we get the payoff of the story and everyone's teasing Rebecca as though she has slept, they get a good review. So they're like, you must have slept with this critic. Carla is gone and Frasier is there. Carla has flown to Seattle. Frasier did not, because
I thought Frasier came back without her.
Nope. And at this point, we don't know that Frasier has any connection to Seattle. That happens much later on in Frasier the series.
Frasier is like taking on this air of authority and talking to his patients as they're strapping into the seats in the plane and, telling them, think about this and that and remember your exercises and whatnot. And I remember thinking like, wow, the flight crew is just letting him sort of like take over here and kind of going like, well, it's a little unrealistic, but I don't know, if you had like a teacher with their students on an airplane, you would let them kind of stand up and tell them what to do and stuff.
Yeah, he was standing in the aisle, and then there were a few seats behind. So Carla had a row to herself, and then there was a woman in the row behind her that was on the aisle that was part of their group, and then there were two guys in the front row that was next to Carla that were also as part of this group. And then there were a few other people kind of sprinkled in the background in that plane.
That's it. Were there people on this plane who were not involved in the study?
There were definitely people in the back couple of rows that were not looking at Frasier and nodding along or looking like they were scared in any way. No.
Then they weren't part of the study. So but they were part of the study? He hired them as background actors?
No, I don't think so. I think this, like I'm saying, this was a real flight. Like they booked tickets on a real flight that was short. They went somewhere.
So you're saying it was practice, but a real flight.
Right.
Practice in the sense that it wasn't the flight Carla had to take to Seattle.
Exactly. This was a different flight. It was, I don't know where it was going. I don't know what they were doing, but it was an actual flight.
That is wild.
I know. I
don't know if I agree, frankly. I still think then that it may be that they went to Seattle and Carla said, I'm going to stay with him for a while. See you in a couple weeks.
I'm going to tell you what the official synopsis says.
Okay.
When the flight ends, Carla has overcome her fears, but Frasier is now afraid to fly. Later, Carla flies to Seattle without problems while Frasier is still traumatized.
I guess you're right. So yeah, we didn't even mention the twist that's hinted at in that story.
Right.
Once everybody has sort of calmed down, all of Frasier's little weirdo patients that he's recruited, he starts freaking out. because he sees ice on the wing or whatever.
No, there's turbulence. And okay, so that's one of the things that happen as the like fears unfold. You have a guy, and one of the guys that's sitting in the front row is like, is it okay that I brought this St. Christopher medal and or medallion or whatever? And Frasier's like, of course, if it helps you, then that's good. And Carla's like, oh, great. And she unzips a hoodie and she's got crucifixes and rosaries and St. Christopher medals.
Same strategy as Red Fox.
And she just has a ton of stuff. It's hanging around her like Mardi Gras beads. Like it's a lot.
Same thing Red Fox did.
Yeah. And then another one of the moments is, everybody's listening. All the three other people that seem to be engaged with Frasier and his help and do the breathing or the meowing when he tells them to do this like meow thing when they have to calm down. They're like meow, 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 meow. It's very creepy. And, but Carla, being Carla, is kind of pushing back on him at every turn. And at one point, he's like, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. It's all fine. We're just taxiing or whatever. And then she looks out the window and she's like, is ice on the wing a problem? And then he looks out the window and he's like, no, that's just the sun. That's the sun. That's the sun glinting off. And he starts to get more and more nervous. And then they hit some rough air. And he's like, at first when they hit it, he calls it's just clear air turbulence. It's just cat. Everybody meow because it's just cat. Yeah. And that's when the meowing starts. But then there's a little bit more and he freaks out and he jumps into his seat and puts on his seatbelt and starts doing some heavy breathing. And Carla's like, hey, are you okay? Just meow. And he's like, oh, get away from me with this meow stuff. There's ice on the wing and we're all going to crash.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of true to life, I think, that sometimes somebody else freaking out can be the best way to calm down, and him sort of losing his cool kind of snaps Carla out of whatever her anxiety was.
Right.
So yeah, with this one, if we had Fear of Flying brings out your grumpiness in Red Fox, it brings out your wackiness in John Ritter. With this one, it's kind of all about like, to show that you care about somebody, like to the sacrifice almost of facing your fear of flying in order to prioritize your loved one is really like what it kind of comes down to, right?
I think that, and then I think also the thing you mentioned about oftentimes the best way to get over a fear yourself is to see someone else having that same irrational fear. And Carla says that later in the episode. She's like, yeah, I saw him freaking out. And I was like, well, it'll be all right. And so when you see somebody else, then it kicks in that like mothering instinct or paternal instinct. It kicks in that care thing that we all have in us. Or, I mean,
it also makes you realize,
many of us have.
It also makes you realize how silly they look.
Right.
It just changes your outlook.
Your perspective. And so that is what turned her around. And then she was able to go and see her husband.
And that's kind of it, like you said, she was a tough gal. So it's sort of ironic that she's afraid of that. But then it's like somebody like that, the things they are scared of, it's going to be hard to get them to confront it. So,
right. Well, because they're so sort of surly in the first place, it's hard to make people like that do anything that they don't want to do and have no reason to. I think what's similar about all of our characters that have been so far, that have been afraid to fly, is that they are like hometown people. They're like living and working in the place where they sort of grew up. And there was never any need to fly. There was never any need to go anywhere else. And so this presented that opportunity, and they wouldn't have known that they were afraid to fly until that opportunity was presented. It changes a little bit, I think, when we get to Blackish.
Yes. Let's talk Blackish.
Blackish. This is season 2, episode 7. And I know you love this, titled Charlie in Charge.
Charlie in Charge. Tribute to the greatest American television show ever.
God, no.
So Blackish is not a show I'm super familiar with. I remember, the ubiquitous Subway ads and stuff when it came out, but I was never an Anthony Anderson fan. He's one of these guys that would always pop up as the funny guy in movies. And, Nothing against him, but it wasn't something I ever looked into. Like you said, we're going into this halfway through the second season, and I feel like both of us were just kind of dropping in pretty much cold, right?
Yeah, so again, same. I'm not a show that I watch, or know. I know about all the spinoffs and everything, but I'm going back and watching the show. This show is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like it's a family situation comedy, sort of a little bit like Modern Family, but not. It didn't need all of the extra. Like, you don't have to have 1,000,001 different families to bring the storylines together. There's a quickness to the dialogue. There's a snappiness, even in the like the kid actors.
I would say especially
those kid actors they're great. Like the youngest daughter. Oh my gosh, I could watch her all day. She's so funny. And then the guy who plays Charlie he's a comedian, right?
Dion Cole.
Yeah, he's a comedian, and he is cracking me up. His whole character in this is like, oh, that little girl's a witch. Like, he's like afraid of the little girl, and he's the one that's babysitting by accident. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First, you see immediately the sort of modern single camera difference, because this begins in media res, as we like to say in the biz. It begins on the plane in the middle of Anthony Anderson's freak out. And it's completely cinematic. You know, you've got all of these different perspectives and interesting angles, and you're jumping around, and just the whole vibe of it, you feel that jump 20, 25 years ahead in TV technology.
Yes, 30 years ahead, because we went from Cheers 1988 to 2015, this episode. And we get what we know as an experience of being on the plane as cramped. You have Dre, the dad character. He's in the middle seat of a row of 3, and you got 2 guys on either side of him. His shoulders are broader than the seat behind him, and he's drugged because he takes anti-anxiety medicine in order to be able to fly. And you see him like falling asleep and nodding off and kind of laying his head on the guy next to him, and then waking up because he's touching a stranger. And you really get that cramped feel, like the camera's right up close. You're not seeing a bunch of other seats on the plane because they don't have that camera in the wide, right? Yeah. You're just seeing the 3 kind of like I said, it feels claustrophobic in the way that a plane does. And then it flashes back. He goes, well, how did we get here? And it flashes back, and it tells us his backstory of having had a very traumatic flight at one point.
It's one of those, I would say, a lot about this show feels very of its time. I feel like one thing you had a lot of on TV at this time is those super quick little cutaway scenes or mini scenes or whatever. Yes. And you get one of those where he goes like, I'll tell you why I hate flying. And then you just get like 5 seconds of... It's like the airbags are dropping down from the ceiling and the plane is crashing.
The oxygen masks are coming down from the ceiling, and the plane is, people are freaking out, and it's got that like shaky camera movement to let you know that things are not feeling good. And then it just immediately flashes back to present, and we're in his office.
Yeah, like I said, we're not super familiar with the show, so for me, the dynamics of all these characters, it took a little figuring out, right? He's working with a handful of his colleagues, including Charlie, Dion Cole, who is, this sort of family friend character that he works with. And you look at this guy and you listen to him, right? He looks kind of strapping, and he has this very silky smooth voice, this sort of Barry White kind of voice. So my initial sort of assumption is, okay, this is his friend from work. This is going to be like Jay from Herman's Head. This is going to be a sort of sexed up, like sort of macho man or smooth
He's
customer.
The single one. Like what you always have like one friend that's a single guy or that is a man about town.
Yes, you think this guy is going to be very confident and strapping,
and he is, because we find out he's on the phone phone with a former flame, but then he comes back and he's taken that out, and he's taken out his earpiece, and he's like, oh, she's coming into town, or she wants to whatever. He's like, but I'm never going to see her. And they're like, well, why? If she was the woman the one that got away, you're single, why wouldn't you see her? And he was like, oh, I have phone game, I don't have in-person game.
Right. So he's very inane in a lot of ways. Like he specifically is insecure about his game, right? His game with the ladies. And in a more general sense, he's just odd. He's just strange and quirky.
He's quirky. He's a wacky friend character, 100%, which we see in the little scenes where he's at his house with his son. They're playing video games, and we get this like visual comedy bit twice in the episode where he gets a call or something happens and he is going to leave the house. He's going to leave the apartment, and his kid is now in the dark because he leaves and he turns off the light, and his kid goes, Dad, and it's just great. It's like he's so in his own world.
Right. But it was hard for me at first to sort of get a handle on this characterization. Because like I said, his look and his voice and everything just sort of didn't match at first. And then what I sort of likened it to is he's a little bit like Joey from Friends. Like he's like a little bit of a himbo. It's a different version of that. He's definitely not exactly like that, but he's somebody that if you just look at him or just listen to him talk, he's smoldering, just like Joey was. But then you get to know him just a little bit, and he's got that sort of puppy dog quality to him, where he's lovable because he's a little dumb.
Or is he just quirky is it dumb, or is he just quirky? I don't know. Like what it kind of reminded me of is Chris Traeger. Rob Lowe's character in Parks and Rec, right? Sure. Like, and I think Rob Lowe recently gave an interview where he said he's a character actor trapped in a matinee idol's body or a leading man's body or whatever. And I was like, that's what I kind of see in this guy.
Well, I think that's something that he does. I think John Hamm, all these guys, I think that's exactly what Dion Cole is doing, where it's like, part of the joke is that they are so good looking,
right?
And they're able to use that in a way that's funny.
Yeah.
The main story is Anthony Anderson and his wife.
So that's Tracy Ellis Ross, and she went to Brown in real life, and their daughter in this show is going on college tours and wants to tour Brown. And so Bo is super excited they live in California, super excited to take her daughter to her alma mater. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have to fly.
Yeah. And so we get another case of gimme the drugs, right? Anthony Anderson is all weird because he's hopped up on drugs.
Yeah. And so we don't get any of the like oh no, anxiety, I'm scared of flying. This was the first show of the four where there was because of the way we started it, there was no surprise that this person was afraid to fly. It was established right from jump. And so then it was like we were just waiting to get back to that moment of him being on the plane where we started.
Right. But there is a return journey to contend with, and that's going to be a little bit of a plot point too. But yeah, the main story is about them sort of coming to terms with the daughter going to college. The fear of flying aspect of it isn't really central to the story, except that when they're on their way home, Anthony Anderson doesn't have his drugs. And he basically says, like, I'm going to tough it out now, because if you do choose to go to this faraway college, I'll have to get used to this. And so he's basically doing the same thing as Carla and saying, I'm going to prioritize my daughter and, tough it out and get over my fear of flying.
Yeah. And we see a bunch of times throughout the episode him trying to big up UC schools, like any of the, California university system state schools. So he's trying to big those up and he says to his daughter at the end, like, I can't stand the thought of you being 3 miles away, let alone 3,000 miles away. And so this whole thing is it's going to be hard. Will you hold my hand? And it's a very sweet moment. But what we didn't know at the beginning was where this was all going. Because at the beginning, like we said, he's sitting in between two random strangers that are not like part of the cast of the show. So like where's his family on the journey over? Well, so we find out in this great little scene that his family doesn't sit with him on planes because of the way he is.
Yeah.
And so they give him his drugs and they put him in coach and they let him sleep. And they flew first class. So that was a fun little switch around for that. And then in the end, when we see the second on the plane scene, he's up in first class with his daughter having this conversation. And that one, we don't get that claustrophobic feel as much because they're shooting from the aisle, sort of sideways into the seat, because and the seats are bigger.
Right, because the vibe isn't like that anymore.
Right.
He's not panicking. Yeah, and so it's sort of the same sentiment as Cheers. But to be honest, the other storyline, I guess you would call it the B plot, that is the more fun.
It's so much fun. The Charlie in charge
it is
storyline.
It's another version of the classic big lie story that, I love to hate in all these movies and shows. Where you're going to begin your relationship with lying about everything about yourself, right? That's what Dion Cole is doing. He invites the woman over to the main family's house to have the 3 kids of the main family pose as his kids. And I love the daughter.
The youngest daughter.
Right. The youngest daughter's
away.
Yes. The youngest daughter explains my sentiments perfectly. She says, this plan comes pre-ruined, right? There's no way, there's just no way it could.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, there's no way this could ever work. It's so silly that you don't even really worry about it. What I love about this is, again, we're coming to this fresh, so we don't know to what extent these different quirks of the characters have been established. Apparently, the son loves Nancy Meyers movies.
Oh, this is so good. Okay, we got to set this whole thing up, though. So let's go back a little bit. So Dre's on the plane, and his wife says to him as she's walking up to first class, like, hey, call Charlotte, the babysitter, and make sure she gets there. So he's like, call Charlie.
Calls Charlie.
And calls Charlie instead of Charlotte. So that's how this character ends up babysitting in the first place.
Yeah.
And the youngest daughter had been so excited, and so had the younger son, so excited that Charlotte was going to babysit because she's this great babysitter that makes them banana splits. And then Charlie shows up. And the youngest daughter is just not having it. She's like, no way.
Yes, the youngest daughter character is very much, if you remember Abigail Breslin in 500 Days of Summer, the sort of super precocious, it's always the littlest, youngest kid that has an answer for everything and is the smartest one in the room.
And she reminds me a little bit of, what's her face in Bob's Burgers too. She has that sort of dry delivery.
Yeah, you don't mess with me. I don't suffer fools, that kind of thing. Yeah, and so she's at odds with him the whole time.
And also at odds with the oldest brother. Mm-hmm. The oldest brother who he's like 14 and he's a romantic, we find out, and loves Nancy Meyers movies. And then so he and the younger brother are going to help Dion Cole, Charlie in this. Yeah, they're going to help Charlie pull off this plan because the girl that he had been on the phone with before FaceTimes him, and he's like, I can't do it. I don't have any FaceTime game. I can't do it. And the older son is like, no, you can do this. Is it something's got to give or it's complicated?
Yes, which to me, there's no question. Something's got to give is a masterpiece, and It's Complicated is not that great. But he chooses Something's Got to Give, wardrobe-wise anyway, because he shows up in the next scene with the white turtleneck and white pants, just like Diane Keaton wears in Something's Got to Give. He later asks to be cut out of it, which is what Jack Nicholson does with her in that movie. It's all just really fun and quirky, you know, and it's just kind of playing against your expectations for the different characters. Like I said, the fact that Dion Cole is so strapping and that all this guy in real life would have to do would be like nothing for women to be attracted to him.
Well, but the history of this is kind of weird too, right? Because all of this quirkiness that we're noting in his character, the reason that he and this girl didn't last is because he impregnated her Cinnabon coworker. And I'm assuming that's the child that we see in the dark multiple times. So yeah, like she pieced out on him because he cheated, and but now is like coming back into his life because she thinks that he has gotten his life together, and he is trying to pull off that this is his house and these are his kids because he's gotten his life so together. And that's the thing. And by the way, the girl, the woman in the episode, it's her name's Dominique in the episode, but it's Amber Rose, who's sort of she's kind of she's like girlfriend famous. She dated Kanye West, and then I think she's with like Wiz Khalifa or something now. Like, and I know her because I watched her on Dancing with the Stars, and I knew she was like tabloid fodder. Okay. But she, like, that's her. I don't know that if she was like maybe like a struggling actress and started dating rappers or whatever, but like that's who, like, she's this girl that is sort of famous in the same ways that the, you know, like Paris Hiltons and Kim Kardashians get famous.
This one was really interesting. And yeah, I liked it a lot. I felt like it was very of its time. Like, even though 2015 is not that long ago, I feel like just the sensibility of this show, the sense of humor, I just felt that sort of post 30 Rock energy to it, to that sensibility.
With a little music, like not as quirky as the music in 30 Rock and as upfront, but there's a little bit, and then the quick cuts.
And it's not a criticism, but it's just interesting to sort of notice that. And I guess the one thing I found myself thinking was, you know, the characters are all very quirky in their own ways. And again, we're sort of struggling to get a handle on it because we're just watching this random episode. But it made me wonder, like, would this be a better match for the old-timey way of doing sitcoms, for a multicam, where maybe the whole feel of it is a little louder and a little more in your face, because this feels like you're watching a movie. You know, this feels like a very low-key, down-to-earth experience, and the characters are really friggin' silly a lot of the time.
A lot of the times. I think definitely we could have done Kevin Can Fuck Himself kind of a thing, where the scenes that were in the house where he was like making it like, this is my fake life, this is my you know, pretend thing, could have been done in the way that you're talking about. And it would have been a stylistic choice as well because of the fakeness of it, you know, that he was like putting it on in the studio audience, and, you know, even sort of some sort of joke to the, like, why are there people here? You know what I mean? Something like that. Like that could have been done. But truthfully, it was so good. Like, I wouldn't change anything.
No, I guess my feeling is, I think I liked it too. I feel like I didn't like it. I didn't get into it as much as you did. I think there was just a little bit the same way I feel about these Office episodes we've been watching that are towards the end of the series, where it's like everybody's wacky, everybody's silly, you know, and so it becomes like a craziness contest, you know, and it's like the wife says, she uses the word dork to describe herself at the end, and I'd say like that fits. That actually sort of helped me. That was like a little bit of a shortcut for me to kind of understand where she was coming from, and to an extent where the whole family is coming from, is they're dorks. And that's kind of the fun of it. And look, I love Bob's Burgers. That's kind of similar, where like there's no straight man. Everybody is crazy. Right. And so I think it's probably good, but it was overwhelming maybe to drop in like that. And again, that was just a sort of observation I made, that the reality of that filming technique didn't totally match the zaniness of the sense of humor. Yeah. But so looking back on all these Fear of Flying TV episodes, what do we think? MVP, what best, worst, through lines?
This is okay. So I'm having a hard time finding an MVP in this run. And that's because I liked Blackish so much that now it's going to be a new, just kind of something I put on. So I'm super interested in this show now. So that's got to vote because of that. Like, just, it's such a good show. I want to go back to the beginning and see, like, what is this? Who are these characters? Are they always like, did this girl, the youngest daughter, did she start off like this, or was she just like, somebody figured out how to write for her and she was so funny? Like,
do they talk about Nancy Myers in every episode or just this one?
Probably just this one. I want to see more. Like I said, when we were talking about Three's Company, John Ritter and all of his physical comedy brilliance, that was why I wanted to include this episode. I wanted to see what was the story behind it, because I had seen the YouTube or the TikTok video of that clip and just was so looking forward to that. So, of course, that was fun. It wasn't a surprise. So I can't say that would be, that was the best one, because I knew it was coming. Had I not known it was coming, probably would have been my favorite. How do you go wrong with Cheers, right? Like, Cheers is amazing. This wasn't a grand episode of Cheers. This was a sort of down the middle, whatever. Okay, fine, episode of Cheers. And then Sanford and Son, which is, you have Red Fox, and maybe you know more about the history of stand-up comedians getting sitcoms. Like,
this has to be one of the first.
Is this early in that? I mean, like, this is a prime example of, yes, like, this led to Seinfeld, right? Like, this Red Fox, it's just, we're all the jokes, like you said, are set up so that he can hit these home runs and do these funny bits. And it, within the first 5 minutes, he has the heart attack, which is what you wait for in every episode. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, it's a hard one. I think now that I've talked through it again, I think Blackish has got to win, just because I'm so interested in it. But yeah,
for me, and I agree, this is one of the strongest lineups we've had. I think I wrote more notes for this one than any of the others we've done so far. These were all really fun. To me, I had the reaction to Sanford and Son that you had to Blackish, where I'm like, oh, now when I'm bored and, idle, I'm going to watch Sanford and Son. Like I said before, I really appreciated the sort of simplicity and purity of, like, it's like a comic strip. It's just like watching Charlie Brown and Linus, it's just like these two characters in these, like, simple archetypal situations. And it's just like, it was like one step removed from even the old sort of rudimentary sitcoms that we watch, like the Brady Bunch or Gilligan's Island or something. This just really felt super stripped down, back to basics, like, just kind of watching it in its purest form. And it's really fun. And just his personality was so fun.
For sure.
So what is in store for next week?
Next week, we are talking about the high school reunion. We have many, many shows on the list, but we've selected 4 kind of throughout history. We're going to start with the Andy Griffith Show in 1963, Season 3, Episode 19, Class Reunion. Moving on to Married with Children. It's a 2-episode arc, Season 3, Episodes 17 and 18. It's called Married with Prom Queen and Married with Prom Queen, the sequel. Then we'll go to Martin, Season 2, Episode 2, Really, Gina's Not My Lover. And we'll end it up with 30 Rock, Season 3, Episode 5, Reunion.
So that's Class Reunions next week. And until then, we will declare this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.